There's a silver lining to everything, even Djokovic's 3-year ban on arrival in Australia. COVID-19 lasted longer for Novak than it did for others, and his refusal to vaccinate had restricted him from entering Australia. Now, things are finally on course ahead of the 2023 Australian Open. But they aren't all sorted on the Djokovic controversy. With a heated discussion on his return raging in the tennis community, let's see what awaits the Serb phenom upon touchdown. First off, the tennis legend returns after 3 years in exile. For Novak, who's constantly led the tennis rankings each season counts, Djokovic had to miss 3 years of peak tennis during the pandemic, including the Australian and US Open. This came as a result of his decision to resist getting vaccinated. You could admire him or hate him for the decision, and many did both, praising the player while some criticized the man, yet the noise around him really didn't distract the Serbian who stayed with his decision, for better or worse. At the same time, the 35-year-old retained top form, finding rhythm and motivation despite having limited pro practice during the regular tennis season, having missed all American Masters 1000 events. Surely the old Knowles game was going to take a hit alongside his reputation, no? Let's look at how the Joker maintained his game despite being a no-show at big events. Being a 21-time Grand Slam champion really does prepare you for anything. Or perhaps it's the other way around, with the feisty determination of the Serb paving the way for a record-setting Grand Slam along with a host of other career trophies to his name. To those anticipating his downfall, he also had another thing coming, taking the ATP Finals last year and the ATP 500 at Astana alongside other career firsts. Racking up the wins was also another match he'd been waging with the Australian government, his travel clearance. He won that medal just recently with the cancellation of the 3-year ban imposed on him. From the new normal to back to normal, things seem to have gone back to pre-COVID times for the most part. Still, will Djokovic find it easy to adjust in this new highly vaccinated world as a lone rebel? Up next, what might a return to Australia mean for the Joker? It must feel sweet to have clearance after all the opposition that he's faced. If there's anything the legendary tennis player from Belgrade revels in, it's a challenge. Here was a challenge that seemed too high for anyone to bother with: COVID safety mandates. Still, the Knoll managed to pull off the impossible after a few setbacks and a couple of years of waiting. With his return to Australia in less than a month, Novak can expect to both flex his tennis muscles at the ATP 250 and also go for that coveted 10th seal for himself at Melbourne Park. His career success is already pretty solid, but the Serb's behavior on field and off will also go a long way to restoring his legacy. If he performs well, he can expect a hero's welcome, and if he rouses up controversy, well, what damage can he do that hasn't already been done? Following up the Australians' reception to Djokovic's return, from Andrew Giles, the minister who overturned the ban on Novak, to Novak himself, everyone's in it together, both for the cheers and the boos. We suspect, though, that most of the population's busy preparing for the upcoming tournament with coronavirus in the distant rearview mirror. On the other hand, the COVID-19 emergency might not be as severe as a couple of years ago, but the behavior exhibited by Novak's bound to cause a roar of uproar even now. A survey shows that around a third of the local population is in favor of his return. A similar figure is totally indifferent, but the majority still believe no one is above the law. Not even the legendary tennis player who will be a big-name addition to the Grand Slam in Melbourne. Now for the marketing in Australia around the Novak phenomenon. Whatever the social implications might be, there are big benefits to having Novak on board to open in Melbourne. The tournament's directors touting him as the player to beat, with his return to the tournament season after a spell of limited activity being a highly exciting time for both the player and the tennis community. The presence of Djokovic in the country will also open the gates for many other nations where COVID-19 protocols might still be in place in one form or another. The acceptance of the anti-vaccination stance by the government at least also signals a number of travel clearances in the works for many more unvaccinated players and members of the public. The precedent's not going to stay limited to Australia either. In the United States, where the Knoll has missed the US Open and several more tournaments, regulations might get flexible after the Serbs' arrival in Australia goes through without any snags. So far, the court looks to be ready for the game, with the now 8th-ranked player in the world hungry for more success in the country that's already netted him a record 9 wins in the Australian Open. It's It's certainly a lucky charm and a career stronghold for Novak, who's also won 3 times in Melbourne before the ban on him was enacted in 2022. What's more, publicity is ramping up even before his arrival, both good and bad. While a lot of tennis fans might be pleased to see the player return to action and regain his #1 spot in the ATP World Rankings, the player's also creating noise on the Australian home front for his dismissal. A storm of activity has overtaken the legislative corners of Australia over this player's re-entry into the country. The Shadow Minister for Home Affairs has herself called it a matter of Australian integrity to stop the player's entry to the country. While the country no longer requires vaccination as mandatory for entry to the country, the fact that Noel's 3-year ban was in place before being overturned just in time for the 2023 season does look shady. Still, the government seems to have thought it an affordable hoopla if it meant the top tennis player getting to play on Australian courts. Sticking to his guns, the player is still not vaccinated. This makes the concession fall totally with the Australian government, but as the Shadow Minister herself suggested, at least the organizers are getting economic value out of it. Hopefully the cost for either side will be recouped, both in terms of medal wins and increased audience and economic activity in the city of Melbourne for organizers and the city government. As for Novak, he's got his eyes locked on his next goal. It's not competing with the government or litigating for a visa entry anymore. Instead, he's back to doing what he does best, playing to win. For now, he's eyeing his target, Carlos Alcaraz. While Novak's locked on his target, tennis players around the world are also gearing up for the Serb's arrival, who's notorious for being competitive on court and off it. Just like the media carnival around his visa for readmission, there's a range of options building within the tennis community around Novak's return. Let's hear it from the players themselves. Following up, a couple of players had made peace with Noel's return. Leading the list of those supporting the passage of justice is Rafael Nadal himself. His support is also lent credibility by the fact that Nadal's not one who's always seen eye to eye with his peer, but he believes in justice first and foremost, and accordingly, if the courts have cleared Novak, the matter's as good as closed. That's not to say that legal resolutions are necessarily moral too. The King of Clay acknowledged that the Serb had to face the consequences for his actions. He did so for a brief portion of the 3-year ban, but now that things are done, the best way to humble the player would be on the court. Nick Kyrgios too had joined the voices calling for justice for the Joker's actions to not get vaccinated, but he also expressed sympathy with the player, who'd spent his prime years out of the game for his decision. Still, the Australian admitted that his country seemed to be too hard on the player, causing him to pass through additional hurdles to secure a visa simply because he was a high-profile figure who might be made an example of. Up next, an overwhelming reaction of Novak's actions. The mixed reactions shown by Nick and Nadal were balanced out by the all-around rejection of Novak's return to the court in Australia as a consequence of his privilege. Stefanos Tsitsipas was one of those who'd originally been skeptical about the COVID-19 vaccines, but decided to stick by the rules. For him, tennis and rules come first. In hindsight, Novak's decision to stay unvaccinated seemed headstrong, and the Greek player minced no words about it. In a game, everyone must play by the same set of rules. That's what makes a game a level playing field. Andy Murray joined the chorus of condemnation for Novak. While he denied any ill intention towards the player, he did express regret for the unfortunate way the Serb had behaved when it came to getting the jab. From where Murray's standing, this rule breaking isn't serving anyone but Novak's own ego. Murray's own opinion on the vaccine's also been pretty sensible and standard throughout, with him receiving a vaccine booster shot just last December. Finally, even tennis peers are looking forward to the competition. All of the criticism both by players and the community at large can't ignore the big name that Novak is to the game. Even more important is the skill set he'll bring to Melbourne Park. Many tennis players, including Cameron Norrie, can't wait to play against him and find out where they stand. Norrie expressed his admiration for the former world #1, calling him both an inspiration and a competition. In fact, his respect for the Serb is so great he can't wait to measure himself against the 9-time Grand Slam champion. At Melbourne Park, Norrie, alongside many of his peers, will get the chance to do just that, pending Noel's Nadal's comeback from a period of exclusivity over the last year. As for the audiences, we're sure once Novak's on the ground, tennis will become the prime focus. If he fails, Novak will not only lose his biggest right to credibility, his legendary gameplay, and if he wins, he might just turn into the invincible demigod of tennis. A bit brash, very bratty, but supremely talented. However, that's gonna be it for this video, my friends. What do you think on the Novak situation? Please let us know in the comments below if you liked the video. Also remember to hit the like button, and if you'd like to see more content like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Thank you for watching, we'll see you in the next one.